Gary Ayres, how are you?
Yeah, I'm well, Finey. How are you?
Shut the back window because it's a bit chilly. Again, perfect Waverley. Rohan, do you have memories of Waverley being cold and hard to get out of the car park?
Yeah, pretty much. And wet and traipsing across a whole lot of mud to get to your car and not finding your car and then queuing up for 2 hours to get out of here. So all we're missing is the mud, really, Gary. But it was a pretty, I mean, it was more a home to you in the twilight of your career, I guess, but always a pretty happy hunting ground for the Hawks, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, Rohan, and obviously the games that were played certainly during the Escort Cup games and Panasonic Cup games, and they were generally about the middle of the year, and it was wet and foggy, and it was really difficult, obviously, because of the way the ground surface was. But then by the end of my time, they certainly got the ground surface right, and it became a pretty good ground. And as we well know, and history will say, we played the 1991 premiership / grand final out here. So it has got some really good memories, and you see what the mighty Fighting Hawks are doing now. So it's always nice to come out.
When did Hawthorn play? Was it Claremont in that?
Oh, and the sprinklers came on.
Yeah, that was
79.
One of the memories. We were just basically standing out in the middle of the oval, and of course Claremont were pretty keen to do well, and I think even maybe the Cracker brothers might have been playing as well from memory. And next thing, we're standing there in a slight stop in play, and next thing the sprinklers came on. So not only was it raining from down below, but also too generally rained up above.
Now, like a lot of those Hawthorn players that went on and played in that great era, you did a fair apprenticeship, didn't you? I think you started, 78 or something?
Yeah, that's right. Rohan started in 1978. I came down a little bit later, actually, in the season, because I'd actually completed the 1977-78 pre-season, and as they did, they were going through the list at certain times and reassessing if you should stay on or not. And it came to a point just before the season started that they thought I could play in the under-19s for Hawthorn. Well, I'd already come from Warragul as a 16, 17-year-old playing senior footy, and my father thought that would be a backward step because you're already playing against men, and if you want to improve your footy, that's what you should do. So I ended up going back to my local club, Warragul, and ended up playing the first half a dozen or so games back at Warragul, and then was invited down for a game actually out of Waverley against Richmond reserves, because they thought that'd be handy coming from Warragul. It wouldn't be as far as you to travel, but I ended up only having to play 6 reserve games before I got a taste of senior footy out at the Whitten Oval. So I was probably fairly lucky in that regard, but I certainly found out that football at this level can be a great leveller. I made my debut against Footscray, kicked 3 goals, and got picked the next week against Richmond at Princes Park, got 2 possessions, got dropped for the rest of the year.
Jeez, that's pretty tough, 3 goals after a debut. So were you sort of naturally a forward, or?
Yeah, that's where I was playing a lot of my footy. I guess as you grow up, you're sort of in a team that you always think you're playing the midfield, and I guess I was lucky that possibly had a little bit more talent than a lot of the other kids coming through the junior grades, and I guess I was lucky I was coached actually by my father and a good friend of his. The 2 local coppers took on to, I guess, create a junior footy club, and one used to coach the under-12s and the other used to coach the under-14s. And then when I moved up to senior footy at 16 for Warragul, I was playing at centre-half forward, so I guess there was a little bit of naturalness there, because that's where I played most of my footy. But that was all to change about 4 or 5 years later when Alan Jeans came to the club.
Well, history would say it was the right decision, wasn't it?
And there was a couple of players that probably weren't necessarily household names or considered the best Hawthorn players, who will always be remembered as Norm Smith medalists, Colin Robertson, and that was controversial. Interesting choice, Colin Robertson.
My childhood hero, I won't forgive him.
He decked Timmy. I mean, look, he was a good player, wasn't he?
He was.
Speedy wingman from Tassie.
He was a very good player, and of course, obviously, John Kennedy Jr. used to have the old moustache as well, and there was probably some thought that maybe they should have actually got half the medal each.
That's right.
Because of Robbo's ability to certainly be very flashy, and he'd really link up well through the middle of the ground, and that dash off half-back, and he was really, really quick, and once he got the ball, he generally used it well. And again, it's like those moments where you just think that these are the games where you set yourself to be, I guess, part of creating history. And we'd actually thought we had a reasonable chance in 1982, but we got stitched up out of Waverley by Carlton in the prelim.
Yeah.
And then the following year, it was just a case of everything was starting to really, I guess, be seen as an emerging younger group. And whether it was Mewey or John Kennedy Jr., Swabby, Dermott played, obviously, a lot the next year after debuting in the final in 82. So it was a bit of a changing of the guard, but we still had Lee Matthews and still had Knightsy and guys like Pete Russo, Mick McCarthy, Rodney Eade, Terry Wallace, Dickie Loveridge. So they were all, it was a pretty good side.
Oh, it's an amazing side.
The other, of course, was out, I'm pretty sure was out here when Paul Deere put his name up in lights. I think a few people, when the announcement came through of the Norm Smith medalists, rushed to their footy records, and unless you're a Hawthorn supporter, didn't quite know what was going on. But again, unsung hero, had a really good afternoon and can't take that away from him.
Well, we always thought going into that game, and don't forget too that earlier that year out at Princes Park, they'd given us a real hammering. I think it was about 80 odd points or something like that. And
well, they hammered everyone. They only lost 3 games that year until you stitched them up in the final in Perth.
Exactly right. And it was funny because we'd actually played them in Perth a couple of weeks prior to that game, and we'd only been beaten by 4 goals. And it was a really interesting mood in the room afterwards, and also too on the flight back, enjoying a couple of Crown Lagers. That
as you did.
Yeah, as we did. And I think they might have even upgraded us to business class or something like that. So we actually felt that then they weren't as that sort of invincible team that had won 13 straight and were taking all before them. And we knew if we had another opportunity, we'd come back and certainly be a bit better than what we were. And as it turned out on grand final day, Paul Deere was certainly a wonderful player, but it was also too the forward line. We felt we always had one tall that they couldn't match up on.
Yeah.
And Dermy and obviously Jason kicked, I think, 10 between them or something.
Yeah.
And
Steve Lawrence played a good game in that grand final as well. Of course, 91 grand final, that would take us on to the biggest disappointment of your career, Gary, which would be that you missed out on the infamous Angry Anderson Batmobile performance because you were in the rooms.
Yeah, well, thankfully, probably from what I heard, and then what we saw later, we were very, very lucky that we weren't part of it. But you could just hear Angry in the background with his big, loud voices, you know. So, yeah, but certainly the result was much more favourable than maybe Angry's tunes.
Was it a bit surreal? I mean, it's probably a silly question in many respects. You're playing in a grand final, but I covered that game. There was just something a bit surreal about it not being at the MCG. I mean, you had daytime fireworks and Angry, and did it feel like a grand final?
Oh, it definitely did. The build-up, and obviously we knew a fair way out that if you were lucky enough to play in the grand final, that's where it would be played anyway. So for us, playing in finals, playing in grand finals, that group was so driven to be successful that it wouldn't have mattered if we played on the bloody moon. It would have been, it would have been another game that was certainly going to be something that we wanted to have that taste of success. And I think that was really unique with that whole group that came through, that we could have the nucleus of that side and still add Pritchard and Platten and Dunstall and Lawrence and Morrissey and Jenke and McGuinness and all those sort of boys.
Andy Collins
as well, Dean Anderson, Anthony Condon, Darren Jarman, the list goes. It was, and look, we were certainly indebted to all the people that did the recruiting and all that sort of stuff. So we were unbelievably driven, and we're always able to then, I guess, what would you say, indoctrinate those players that came in to be doing the same sort of thing. And we played 12 years in a row in finals. It's enormous.
Amazing view. I mean, I've just caught a glimpse of the grandstand there, the Waverley grandstand. This is Mervac Homes, this giant sort of, you'd call it...
estate.
Estate, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Amazing setup, given that this is used to be considered what we called it Arctic Park.
Arctic Park. It's funny though, isn't
far
it?
Ends of the universe.
By the time they got rid of it as a venue, everyone was getting really sentimental about it, weren't they?
You're right. And who knows if we had been able to possibly get a train line around maybe Wheelers Hill or somewhere a bit closer, it certainly might have been able to actually have a little bit more longevity.
Certainly beats taking 2 buses to get here and waiting in the car park for an hour and a half to get out.
It was always great just to sort of cut across. It was always great. I knew the local publican when I was playing junior footy, and he used to take us for a countery, him and his son and myself and a couple of other local lads, and we'd go for a countery in Beaconsfield and then come down here and be always wanting, as young kids did, to try and get on the ground first to kick the footy when the final siren went. And then we'd always go to the KFC on Police Road there and get a bucket of chicken and gnaw on that on the way back to Druid and Warrigal.
That was Paul Van Daar's pre-game ritual. With a few bunnies.
And the snags as well on a Tuesday, Thursday night.
Oh, wasn't that great? See, Finey, the footy media now, they don't know what they're missing. Back in the old Glenferrie days, Bobby Yeoman.
Yes.
And he'd have his apron on with the plastic fake breasts on it. They were great days.
And his white singlet and the cigarette hanging out while he's cooking the drumsticks and the sausages and the chips in that deep fryer. I think one day someone, when they cleaned it out after however many years, found a couple of pairs of old footy boots in there, I think.
The era you played in, I mean, it wasn't a matter of luck. You were part of, and maybe a big part of the reason for 5 premierships.
Yes.
7 consecutive grand finals, etc. 10, 11 years of finals. But this Hawthorn team is touching on immortality if they can. I think what they've achieved already marks them for greatness. But if they were to win the flag this year 4 in a row, well, to emulate what Collingwood did back in the day, but in an 18-team competition, how do you quantify it? It's just an amazing thing that they're striving for and a real chance to do.
Well, it is, Finey, and I guess we were always educated along the lines that you got to remember where you come from, and there's been some amazing people that have established the Hawthorn Football Club as a superpower, and certainly players play their role, but I guess you only have to go back to 1996 when that merger was almost going to happen, and Alan Jeans, as great as he was, and some other great people were all in favour of it, but Ian Dicker and Don Scott and one or two others were dead set against it. So to then think from 1996 to 2016 that we're able to be in this position, it is, as you said, verging on greatness. Now, 3 in a row gives you that title, I think, anyway, but to think that they're in line for possibly 4, and the ability to have to go a long way back in, I guess, 2003, 4 and 5, restart, and then be able to put in place what they've done. It's an enormous credit to everyone involved.
Do you reckon, Gary, it sort of underlines how good a coach Clarkson is and the value of team now? Because I've got to be honest, pound for pound, if I look at the best side that you were part of, and I reckon probably 88 was maybe the peak for you guys versus these guys, I reckon your mob had it all over them for individual talent.
Yeah, and I think that's right too, and I guess you're a little bit biased because you played through that era, and we certainly batted unbelievably deep in relation to personnel that played, and there's no doubt that if we look at what Alan Jeans did when he came to Hawthorn in 1981, he had an emerging group of young players. He was there for 10 years. Alan Joyce stepped in once through the 80s, and obviously 88, as you said, was just a powerhouse team, and I think we only lost 6 games in 2 years, in 88, 89, while still obviously, playing that sort of powerful brand of footy. And then when Alistair Clarkson came to Hawthorn, it was a case of, I would have thought, we need a coach who's going to be here for a long, long time. Yeah. And I think that's one important ingredient, is the stability that he's been able to have and bring and, I guess, keep at the football club. There's been very little change at the top. Obviously, there's Jeff Kennett came and went, and of course Newbold came and went, but you think about head office, and Alistair has been able to assemble a group of people that are very talented, and no doubt Alistair blossomed as a coach and is going to go down as one of the greatest of all time.
I tell you what, I've not been here, and I didn't realise the names of the streets around the old AFL Park, and I would have thought they might have been names like Ayres Avenue, Langford Close would be good because he used to play pretty close.
What have you seen? I know there's a Sir Kenneth Luke Drive.
It is extraordinary. Marleybone, Edgbaston, Goodison, Trent Bridge.
That's a bit weird.
Notre Dame was on the other side there, and we've there's no Dunstall Drive.
No, we've had a POM name it.
Well, what were the even before the Hawks, what were the sort of famous Waverley landmarks? There should be a peanut guy drive and a blue coat attendant, pain in the arse blue coat attendant way.
That's right. There'd be something with 4 and 20, wouldn't there, because of the pies?
The very cold walkway. Stuck in... Oh, here, that's better. Stuck in Traffic Avenue. Seems to be more suitable. We finished with a song, but before we do get to the song, you know, nicknames, especially ones that are bestowed upon you by other people, are sometimes embraced, sometimes not. I can give you the example of Babyface Nelson, the gangster. If anybody ever referred to him as Babyface Nelson, he'd unleash the hells of fury on them and also unload his pistol on them. He just hated the nickname Babyface. So, Rohan, do you know who came up with Conan?
Well, I'm sure Gary does, but I think it was something to do with the hair, wasn't it, Gary?
Well, that's not necessarily the case, Rohan. It would certainly be a comparison that Louis Richards ended up making a little bit later on, but it was very mild, I guess, really, because what we used to do as players, you'd be certainly hanging around in the change rooms before training, and we actually would always have a bit of banter about who did what and who was out on Saturday night and who watched what show and what movie. Anyway, we're down at Scotch College, and anyway, Russell Green always being the prankster that he was, and of course it came up with, did anyone see Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie last night? And Rod Lester-Smith was standing alongside him, and Snuffy goes, yeah, I saw it, Russ. And he goes, yeah, what about that Conan the Barbarian? Anyway, I just happened to be walking past, and of course he goes, there's Conan the Barbarian. So from that point on at training, if I ran past for a hand pass or I went to kick or Russell Green was in that vicinity and Fly Morris and Snuffy, it would be Conan or Coey or Co. So that was how lame brain it actually was, because apparently the two boys had watched Conan the Barbarian on TV.
Are you happy with it?
Oh, it doesn't worry me. I guess I've been called worse.
Well, Robert Muir didn't like his nickname, and he chased a few people around the old Moorabbin, making them apologise for calling him Mad Dog. So
he chased Kevin Smith around Princes Park. He was an umpire.
One of the things when you're obviously in the last line of defence, you'd be certainly close to the goal line and close to the supporters when you were kicking in, and they weren't shy and backwards in coming forward. And certainly when you went over to Adelaide and played in '91 for that very first game, you knew what football supporters were all about after a tongue lashing that particular night.
Now, Gary, a key part of this segment, of course, is we get everyone who is invited on to play us a favourite song, and usually a reason for it. Yours is definitely the most appropriate choice, and everyone hearing it kick in now would recognise, of course, the strains of Jimmy Barnes. No second prize. Well, the Hawks never knew any bloody second prize, did they?
No, we certainly didn't want to be part of it because it meant that there was a bit of failure associated with it, Rod. So no second prize, and we had a few clips one day that we played before a big game and grand final, and certainly we were very, very happy that day we didn't actually get any second prize.
This is very 80s too, isn't it? In fact, why didn't they get Barnesy to do this grand final out here rather than bloody Angry?
Money, mate.
Yeah.
Barnes, I reckon you could have got
What,
Angry.
you reckon Angry paid them?
I reckon Angry might have been... Angry in the Batmobile would have been cheaper than Barnesy in any other normal form of transport, surely.
And possibly too, because Angry was bald and Jimmy Barnes would have had the old mullet back in those days, which we're all obviously famous for. So, but no, it was always a thing that the boys would be very happy about. They would have the players' rage, and these songs would be blasting through the so-called, I guess, miming was a big thing back in those days at the players' rages, and we also think we'd want to be part of it.
You have done to me. Hey, I'll tell you one thing we've got to mention as well. I've become a fan of the Borough. 2 premierships.
One actually, we probably should have had 2.
Second, next one this year. Carnamite Borough.
So. No, that'd be just a great finish to a year that started off pretty well, Finey, so look forward to it.
So, Gaz, that's it. We're back at Waverley.
Yeah, very good.
No Batmobiles.
No, I appreciate it, and
great to have you
thanks very
on.
much for your interest in an old-timer.
Great Hawthorn era, Gary, and a great one now. I just hope this one ends at some stage so a few other teams can get a go.
Yeah.
Gary Ayres, a real star in a car.
Good on
Cheers,
you, mate.
Gary.
Thanks, Ro. Thank you.